by evening. Gregory looked unhealthily pale, and his hands and lips seemed very cold when he reached out to kiss her goodnight after dinner at their hotel. "Are you all right, Gregory?" she asked him. "I hope so," he said uncertainly. And then he added, "Don't worry about me, Vivi. There are a few things that I cannot actually take." "Why don't you eat something then? I know you don't like to eat in front of anyone, but surely you must eat something," she said. "Tell me, what does the man I love eat?" He gave her another sad look. "Oh, my love," he whispered, "the man you love does not eat what you eat at all." She asked him to explain, but he would not, and he looked too stricken for her to push him further on it, so she sent him off to bed. The next morning, they took the train back to Atlanta, where they walked through the city and took in the sights. Vivian asked Gregory what exactly they should go see and do, but he looked unusually listless, and it was hard to get a clear answer out of him, so they just drifted about and looked at buildings and parks. It must be the trip yesterday to the cemetery that has him so out of sorts, she thought. Well, when we get to New Orleans, that should lift his spirits. They got up early the next morning to catch the next Crescent train from New York as it arrived in Atlanta, and then they rode through Anniston, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, and Meridian before heading on towards the cities further south, and ultimately reaching Picayune, Slidell, and then New Orleans. They did not speak much together, but she held his cold hand in hers, and they looked out of the window. The view outside must have changed many, many times already since Gregory had first begun traveling through this area, she realized. How much further would it still change in the years to come? At last they reached New Orleans, by which point Vivian's heart was hammering in her chest. Oh, in a few more days they would see Nadine. As a first stop, they asked at the information desk at the station about whether anyone had seen Gregory's box with his books, but they did not have it there. Vivian and Gregory stepped out of the Basin Street train station, and both turned their heads and looked, as if in unison, at the place across the street where Gregory had once collided with Vivian on the sidewalk. "It was right there," began Vivian. "Oh, my love," he whispered, and then he turned to reach his fingers into her hair and to kiss her temple with his cold lips. Had his lips ever been this cold before? She wanted to ask him if everything was all right, but he had forbidden her to speak of it when his hands got cold, so she imagined that this embargo extended to the temperature of his lips also, and so she said nothing. Something was certainly wrong, though. A taxi took them to the Hotel Monteleone, where Vivian had of course never stayed, or ever imagined that she would stay in her whole life. "You look tired," she finally told Gregory when she came back downstairs and found him sitting listlessly in the lobby. "Yes, I think I need some rest," he told her. "Say, you wouldn't consider letting me go out for a bit by myself this evening after all, would you?" he asked in a small voice. Vivian frowned. "I cannot stop you, but I do wish you would try to put this thought out of your head. You can do it," she said. "I have faith in you." He was silent for a while and then said, "Tomorrow we see the whole city again, and then on Thursday we have a meeting arranged with my friend Ferdinand. He is the one that I flew on all those planes with in the war." "Oh, to be back home," she said excitedly. Then she gave him a tender look come and be with me tonight before I fall asleep?" He gave her a sad smile. "Oh, Vivi." Was he going to tell her no? "Please don't say no," she told him. He sighed. "As you wish," he said. And then in the evening he came to sit with her and to hold her, but his arms were very cold about her, and he seemed far away in his thoughts. "You must be very, very exhausted," she said after a while. "I'm sorry that I was so selfish as to ask you to sit with me when you feel unwell. Go and rest." She kissed him good night, and then lay awake and thought of all the things that they would see and do the next day. The weather the next day was marvelous, and they walked through the entire center of the city, first this way and then that, through Jackson Square, through Lafayette Square, through all of the beautiful streets of the French Quarter, down to the Mississippi River, and along the grand houses in the Garden District. "Oh, the Café du Monde!" Vivian cried. And then later, "Oh, look, the Columns Hotel." He smiled weakly at her, handsomer than any man who had ever lived, despite his pale face and eyes that seemed to be growing larger in his head as the days wore on, and a faint shadow gathering along the top of his cheeks. "Are you enjoying it all, beloved?" "Oh, tremendously so," she admitted. "It mostly looks just like it did before, with only a few things different." "Meanwhile, I think it has changed a great deal," Gregory said. "New Orleans was at the height of its glory when I was born, the most sparkling and wealthy city in America, on account of its port. Business was done here and in New York. Now it is becoming a forgotten thing. My whole life now I have watched it fade, decade by decade, like the charms of a once beautiful woman whom I have intimately known. A city may look like a permanent thing, but it is not. Nothing is permanent." "Nothing?" she asked him. "Nothing except love," he replied, giving her a small, chilly kiss. They walked on and on, taking it all in. By early evening, Gregory said he was rather winded and wanted to return to the hotel. In all the time she had known him, she had never seen him tired. What could be the matter? "Vivi, you wouldn't perhaps consider, well, again, changing your mind and letting me go out alone for a bit while you are asleep. I could use some fresh air," he said after dinner. "Oh, Gregory, you've had nothing but fresh air all day," she told him, "and you just finished telling me how tired you are. No, I'm certain that you can make it. Just go to bed early tonight and have room service bring you something to eat in privacy, whatever it is that you do have, since you haven't told me and are so sensitive about it." He looked down glumly and didn't ask again. Thursday came, and they stopped to buy 2 armloads of white flowers and a dozen roses, and then rode out to Shriver. At first, Vivian thought they would go out to the farm to see Mrs. Mullins, but Gregory said that he did not feel up to it, but that they should still stop at St. Joseph's Cemetery, where the Morgan family crypt was. This day was cool, and dark clouds covered up the sun as they walked into the cemetery. Walking the paved paths between the traditional New Orleans above-ground mausoleums, Vivian thought how the graves were entirely different from the grassy graves that they had seen at the military cemetery in Chattanooga. They walked on until they came to the Morgan family monument, where Gregory set the flowers down to one side and removed his hat. "There," Gregory said, pointing, There is my family in Louisiana." He moved his finger along the list of names carved into the stone's face. "My mother is buried there, Mirabelle Morgan. My father is beside her, James Morgan. My sister Dorothy is there, with her husband and children. And then Jimmy, as you know, is not buried here, but he has his name here. And here is mine," he added, pointing to the bottom. Vivian had not expected this. She dropped his hand and went to take a closer look. There he was, Gregory James Morgan, born 1845 and died 1873. I don't understand," she said in confusion. "Well, what did you do, climb back out?" "Hardly, no. I did not climb back out. But after a while it becomes expedient to update one's personal information," he told her. "I let myself get a grave, lest anyone wonder what had become of me. And then I got on with the rest of my life." "But New Orleans is not New York," Vivian said. "How did no one recognize you? How did no one ask you anything, like they asked the Count of Saint-Germain?" "It is amazing how much bushy sideburns and a wide mustache can change a man's appearance," he said. "Moreover, unlike that show-off, I kept quiet and kept largely to myself, and then eventually I left for Europe for a time. It was easier to manage than I at first thought." "I don't understand," said Vivian, staring at the dates of his supposed life. "You have a grave, but are not in it. Are you, perhaps... Are you... Don't!" he cried, placing a hand on the white stone of his family's crypt, and then closing his eyes and resting his forehead weakly against his hand. "Don't say it. Whatever you were going to say, don't say it. If you say it, I swear you will never see me again." The degree of anguish in his distraught face shocked her. She stopped in her tracks. Why would this upset him so much, she wondered. "You would do that?" she asked him slowly. "I could not live in a world in which you had said such a thing," he replied, opening his eyes again, and she looked at his pale, haggard face and saw that he was miserable. "Say anything else, even that you never loved me, but don't say that. I couldn't bear it. I don't know what you would have me say then in reply, or how I would defend myself to you. Say it, and you break me. Oh, no one needs to remind me what a wretched creature I have become." She came over and took him in her arms, and then she moved her hands consolingly along his back while she held him. He moved against her. Was he crying? Oh, poor Gregory. It had to make him suffer terribly to stand at this crypt entrance and to realize that if nature had taken its just course, he should by rights already be interred here long ago with them. She held him for a few minutes, and then he straightened up, cleared his throat, and she could see that his eyes were slightly red and shimmery. He looked to be in deep anguish. This is turning into a very sad trip, she thought. The entire story of your past. Don't you think you might have told me more of this early on? She asked him. It would have explained a lot, and it probably would have saved us a lot of heartache. He shook his head sadly. There was no way to save us heartache. I had too many secrets for a young 17-year-old girl to deal with, and the longer we would have stayed together, the more additional people would have had to be let in on them. I know you were always unusually mature, but no, it would not have been wise. Look at your mother. She has begun to suspect something is unusual with me, and she has never managed to drop her fear of me since." "I am not my mother," replied Vivian. "I could have handled it. I know I could have, and it was rather arrogant of you to assume that I couldn't. It is the duty of an older man to protect a child, and I felt that duty acutely with you," he said. "I did not feel that I could have acted otherwise. Even now, I question the wisdom of these revelations to you. What good can come of it?" He reached over and gathered the flowers, bent down on one knee, and placed them carefully into a stone urn at the front of the monument, his head lowered, and his hands shaking slightly, but moving tenderly. "The roses are for my mother," he said hoarsely. Vivian took one of the roses and laid it across the flat stone at the front of the crypt, apart from the other flowers. "This one is for you, Gregory James Morgan," she said shakily, tears filling her eyes. They both stood up and were silent for a long time. Then she looked over at him uncertainly, her mind filling with new questions that refused to hold themselves back. "So your speed, your silent movements, your ability to see in the dark, it is not just interesting and quirky, but also somehow necessary to you?" she asked. He sighed, as if suddenly resigned to everything. "A butterfly has wings for a reason," he said at last, evading her direct question. "As a shark has teeth for a reason," she said. "I wish you wouldn't put it that way," he said. "Oh, beloved, can't you see that you are hurting me?" She looked into his bloodshot eyes, and remorse came over her. "You are right. Let's not talk about this now. Perhaps we ought to, clean up the stones a bit, then pull the fallen leaves away. Bring water for the flowers." She bent down and cleaned the few leaves away as best as she could. Then they walked to the pump where the water was and filled a bucket to bring to the stone urn where the bouquet was now gracefully decorating the tomb. As they silently worked, for the first time, here with him at his family's graves, Vivian pulled up in her mind some of the superstitious theories about Gregory that she had long ago considered, but discarded as foolish. Ageless creatures and men who never ate, but yet were unreasonably sensitive to blood. There was nothing like that anywhere, but in storybooks, she thought, as she listened to him pour the water inside the urn. She walked over to the wall of names, and a shiver passed through her as she touched his name. This grave marker that marked an empty grave. Yet there was something here, underneath all of these small clues that she had come to know about him. And although it seemed dreadfully insensitive to ask him anything further at a time like this, she had to probe again. A direct question hadn't worked with him. How else to ask him then? "Are you a good man?" she finally said. He looked surprised. "I try to be," he replied. "And I swear to you, I am as faithful to you and selfless and chaste as I know how to be. I do not give myself to any others, in any sense." She paused and looked up into his face. How does one ask something like this of the man that one has agreed to marry? "Have you ever committed murder?" she asked in almost a whisper. "Whatever you say, I will marry you still," she added quickly, in case that made a difference to him. He had just reached down to set the empty bucket on the ground when he froze, and then slowly turned to meet her gaze. He looked like he might get sick on his own shoes. "Yes, Vivian, I have committed murder," he said at last, making her blood run cold. "I have fought in 3 major wars, if nothing else. What do you suppose I was doing in those wars, if not killing other men?" Vivian felt herself start to shake. "I understand that, but what I want to know is if you still—" "Vivi, stop!" he said firmly. "Look, it hasn't been easy. I've been tasked with being some kind of angel, if you will, but without having been also given the heavenly wisdom and insight to accompany it. I will be honest, I wasn't even all that great of a man before this fate came to me, and I often wish that this could all just be someone else's problem. But then we never would have met because, as you say, I would have been dead already. And now I am thinking that any world that found a way to bring us together cannot be an entirely bad world. Leave it alone, then, and know that I do the best that I can, and do not ask me anything further." "But how can you not tell me?" she began. "Literature is full of characters who insisted on knowing the true identity of their beloved, only to then regret it. Say you don't need to know. Say you love me for myself, no matter what. Say you are mine." And he kissed her there in front of the graves of his nearest of kin, as if it was not a transgression of some kind, his lips cold, but full of a burning energy that tapped in directly to the energy of her own heart. "Oh, Gregory," she sighed, "it is so hard sometimes." "Forgive me, my love," he said. "Where there are shortcomings between us, it is inevitably my fault. But I would rather stay here, shortcomings and all, than to ever leave you again." He put his hat back on, and they walked out of the cemetery, with Vivian wondering what it had all meant. In the evening, they went down to the bar in the Hotel Monteleone to meet with Ferdinand. Gregory chose a corner table and sat down as deep in the shadows as he could, or so it seemed to Vivian. He put his hat and a pair of black gloves on the table in front of him, although Vivian thought it was surely much too warm for gloves. Maybe he should have worn a vest today, she thought, to ward off the chill that he seemed to be suffering from. Light brown-haired Ferdinand Anderson was a handsome young man. Nowhere as tall or as handsome as Gregory, of course, but then Gregory was unique in all the South, and probably most of the North as well, so that was to be expected. Ferdinand's eyes had that special glow that Mr. Gerstner's had as well, Vivian noted, and she drew the conclusion that Ferdinand also had to be a different age than he appeared. She would have to ask Gregory about it afterwards. however old he was. Ferdinand was a flirt, she could see straight off, and as he smiled at her, his eyes sparkled as he flattered her with small remarks on her elegance and beauty. "You must be one of the most graceful belles in all of Louisiana," he told her. "Mr. Morgan must feel very fortunate to have you on his arm." "You may as well congratulate us now, Ferdinand, and stop making eyes at my betrothed. We are soon to be married," Gregory told him. Ferdinand looked very surprised at this. Oh, is that so? Pardon me, Miss Vivian, but Gregory has never yet spoken of marrying anyone before. This must be very serious indeed." "I asked her once already, a long time ago, but she said no," Gregory said, making Vivian want to die of embarrassment. Ferdinand just laughed. "Good for her. Now maybe she decided she'll have you after all, but she has shown you who is boss. Miss Vivian, this man here needs a firm hand to keep him from complete sloth and mental drifting, and from engaging in nothing all day but nostalgic reverie. I took him in hand during the war, but then that wore me out. Somebody else needs to take a turn. I am glad to hear you will now be taking over the reins." He laughed again. Then he looked into the darkness and more closely at Gregory. "Miss Vivian looks radiant and the picture of health, but you, my friend, look rather the worse for wear. Are you all right?" "We have had a series of days in a row of arduous travel and sightseeing," Vivian explained, "and we have also paid some sad visits to sentimental places. We went to see my brother's grave up in Chattanooga, and then we went to the cemetery here, out in Thibodaux," explained Gregory. "Oh, wow! Those must have been some hot dates." Ferdinand gave Vivian a good-natured smile. "Well, any lady who knows Gregory well enough to contemplate becoming his wife must realize that visits to cemeteries are just the kind of thing that his sentimental and soggy spirit relishes in. He once told me that his favorite destination in Vienna, a city with more glorious palaces and Baroque and even Gothic architecture than you could shake a stick at, was the Zentralfriedhof, or Central Cemetery. Well, Miss Vivian, should you ever tire of admiring the graves and wish to go swing dancing instead, you can call me." Vivian smiled. "You do not live in New York, though, do you?" "It doesn't matter where I live. I have a small plane. No beautiful woman from one coast to the other is safe from my attempts to secure a date with her," said Ferdinand, with a twinkle in his eye. "But surely you would draw the line at those ladies who are recently engaged," said Vivian demurely, lowering her eyelashes. This Ferdinand was more fun than she had thought any of Gregory's friends might be. "You are right," said Ferdinand. "With the recently engaged, I wait until after the wedding and honeymoon have worn off, and then, once disillusion has set in, I maneuver in on them and make my move." "Ferdinand is a downright scoundrel," said Gregory dryly to Vivian. "The number of women who have had the dubious distinction of making his better acquaintance reads like the passenger list of the Queen Mary, meaning about as voluminous." Ferdinand pretended to be hurt. "Oh, look now, we cannot all be so fortunate as the two of you soulmates appear to have been. Instead, I console myself with the certain thought that the world is full of many beautiful, if all slightly incompatible women, just waiting to meet me. But, Morgan, I'm sorry." He looked at him again with a worried expression. "You look rather terrible, and it does not look like mere tourist exhaustion or melancholy from looking at graves. Might it be, I don't know, recovery from excess liquor?" "I beg your pardon," said Gregory sharply. "To make such accusations regarding my character in front of my future wife is a bit rich." Ferdinand looked like he was considering the merits of this, then shrugged. "You are right. My apologies. That was not my funniest jest. Sometimes I do unintentionally step a toe over the line. Forgive me. Well, I'm off to meet a man in the Sazerac bar at the Roosevelt Hotel, where unfortunately ladies are still not permitted, Miss Vivian. But would you both like to walk with me and get some fresh air? It is only about 5 minutes from here," he said. Gregory agreed, then paid their bill, put on his hat and gloves, and they walked out with Ferdinand into the night. Gregory offered Vivian his arm. "Tell me about flying," said Vivian, lacing her arm through the crook of Gregory's dark-suited elbow. "I've never flown in an airplane." "Oh, flying is the most wonderful thing in the world. Even better sometimes than the company of beautiful women," Ferdinand exclaimed. They stepped down onto the sidewalk, and then Ferdinand did a very unusual thing. He pulled something out of his pocket, something shiny and round and smooth, that moved up and down on a string that Ferdinand held in his hand. "What is that? Is that a—" "It is a yo-yo," said Ferdinand. "Is it a toy?" she asked him, fascinated to watch it as they walked, and he moved it expertly up and down along its string, without ever disrupting its motion. "Well, it can be that," Ferdinand said smoothly. "Who are you meeting at the Sazerac?" asked Gregory quickly. "May I try it?" asked Vivian, still eyeing the yo-yo. "Oh, no, rather not," said Ferdinand. "You see, it can also be a weapon. A javelin you might throw once, but then it has fallen far away from you, and you do not get a second chance. A yo-yo returns to your hand. The Greeks figured it out first, I believe." "Leave him and his toys, Vivian. We don't want to hear about your yo-yo, for God's sake. Tell us about what you have planned the rest of your evening and stay here in New Orleans," said Gregory again. "Why does he not want to let us talk about this?" thought Vivian. And then, as Ferdinand started talking about his plans in town and at the Sazerac, a small, strange thought from the long-ago past clicked in Vivian's mind. She had been seated by candlelight at her mother's small dining table back in the apartment in Milnberg, and the corpulent and heavily sweating fabric salesman who had once visited them was telling them a story about a friend of his who had met a man in the street who had played with a yo-yo. What had happened in that story? Oh yes, the salesman's friend had become badly injured. He had had some strange name, this man, and Vivian remembered her mother saying that he had a perfect name for a bootlegger. Something about pens and pencils, something memorable. Yes, that was it. It was Ink. Ink Jackson. "Excuse me, do you know a man named Ink Jackson?" Vivian blurted out. Ferdinand looked over at her, puzzled. "No, never heard the name. Is he a friend of yours?" "No, in fact, I've never met him, but I heard a story about him, and apparently he once met a man with a yo-yo and—" Vivian's voice trailed off, and she gulped. Gregory looked worse suddenly than he had all evening. "I won't have any more yo-yo stories, for heaven's sake!" he cried. Vivian's jaw dropped. What had gotten into him? He was never like this. Ferdinand, however, also suddenly looked as if his breezy confidence had taken a hit. "Oh, gee, yes, I think you may be right, Morgan. Best to speak of other things," he said, and he rolled up his yo-yo one last time on its string and put it away in his pocket. In another minute, they arrived at the Roosevelt Hotel. "I remember we came here once for a historic costume ball," said Vivian timidly. "Do you recall, Gregory?" He looked over at her sadly, but with tenderness. "Yes," he said. "You don't know this, but I still have that dress. One day, I hope to ask you to wear it for me again." Vivian blushed, happy again, and briefly forgetting their recent discomfort. They said goodbye to Ferdinand, who looked happy to be quickly away suddenly, and then they returned back to the Hotel Monteleone. "Come to see me, Gregory," she said. "Oh, my love," he said, closing his eyes and taking her hand in his and bringing it to his lips. I feel very much unwell." "But you never feel unwell," she cried in alarm. "What should we do?" "I think I need to get back to New York," he said feebly. "You mean Mr. Gerstner will know what to do," said Vivian. "I understand. We could also call him from here, no?" "No, it would do no good," said Gregory quietly. "I need—" "Oh, he has medicine with him that you need. Is that it?" she asked, trying to figure out the puzzle. Yes, that is it," said Gregory. He was shaking lightly. "Come, I shall put you into bed and tuck you in tonight, like a baby," she told him. Hopefully by morning, he would look a bit better again. But Friday morning found him ashen and corpse-like at her door, mumbling that he could not go anywhere, and that she should go into the city and he would wait for her. She ate a quick breakfast, went back up to sit with him in his room, and then had lunch brought to the room so that she could stay with him rather than leave him. "I don't even know how you could get on the train in this state," she said. "Oh, we must get you a bit stronger. Is there something that I might order for you, to strengthen you a bit?" He sighed and turned his head away, walked slowly to the window and looked out over the street. And then he lay under the covers, and she climbed in with him and held him while he shivered with cold and turned his face away. His fingernails were bluish purple, and his lips were starting to take on a similar tinge. She put her head against his chest, and it seemed like even his heartbeat was receding, whispering fainter and fainter, and having none of that gong-like resonance that she remembered about him from the past. By dinner, Vivian didn't feel like eating either. What if, after having told so many lies about it, fate pays me back and I become a widow after all, and he dies before we can even be married? Sure, he is long-lived, but he never used the word immortal to describe himself. Maybe this was how it was for creatures like him, that one day, without warning, the game was suddenly up. She held him like she might have held Sophie, and she silently cried, hoping that he was asleep just then and did not notice. By nightfall, his voice began to weaken. His beautiful voice, that part of him that she loved best of all, and that conveyed to her his soul. "He's breaking into pieces in front of me," she thought. "By morning I will be sitting here with a pile of very old ashes on my hands and nothing more. What will I do? Oh, what will I do? Have someone open his old crypt back up so that I can place his remains inside?" 1873, his tombstone had read. That must have been the first year that he was 28. And now 1948. would be the last. Finally, after a long day and after she had dozed once or twice in the chair beside his bed, she woke to hear him moving in the dark, struggling to his feet. "Vivi," he croaked hoarsely. "Vivi, love, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I never wanted to fail you. If you have asked me for something, I would almost rather die than fail to do it. But I cannot stay here with you another minute. I have made promises to you, and I can refuse you nothing, as you know, but I have also made promises to others." His voice was scratchy and dry, like a bare tree limb moving against a window pane. "What have you promised? To whom?" she asked, alarmed at seeing him coming so unsteadily to his feet. "I promised Wolf that I would not knowingly end my life," he said. Her panic exploded. "Is this the end, then?" she cried. "Are you dying, Gregory?" His lips were more blue than red by now, and his face and hands had the pallor of death. How he could still be handsome in a moment like this was incomprehensible, and almost made it even more terrifying. "I have to go. Forgive me," he croaked, grabbing awkwardly at his hat, where it rested on a side table. Are you coming back?" she cried after him, but he was already at the door and moving out into the hallway. "Gregory!" She stepped out to follow him. He put on his hat, stopped, and turned around. "Don't," he hissed sternly. "Don't follow me." His tone was deadly earnest, and one that he had never used with her, in all the times that they had ever known each other. "But She took one more step towards him, and he growled at her like a beast. Fear came over her, and she retreated. "I've never really been afraid of him before," she realized. "Other than maybe once. But I am now." He took advantage of the moment to vanish down the hallway, and she stood there for an uncertain moment, hesitating as to what to do. Then she went back into his room, shut the door, lay herself across his bed, pulled his pillow close to her, and it still vaguely smelled of matches and wood smoke, like his hair. And then she put her face against it and sobbed hysterically. What had happened? What had she done? Or what if he never returned? She cried for a long, long time, and then her tears began to dry as her mind began to spin through her memory of various things. Ink Jackson had claimed that he was attacked by a man with a yo-yo. Could he have been attacked using the yo-yo? Could the attacker have been Ferdinand? Why would Ferdinand attack anyone? Did Gregory attack people also? Is this what had happened with Karl Brandt and his love? How did one keep oneself eternally youthful? How could it be achieved? "No, no, no," she whispered. "The man I love is not a man at all." His fear of blood, was it really fear? His not eating anything, was it really possible to live off of nothing at all? How would Gregory look after days and days of consuming nothing at all? Well, what did he look like today? Her mind suggested helpfully to her. And he had apologized to her as he had left. What was it that he had been apologizing for? That he could not keep his word and do what? That he could not stay with her without going out alone for a while. What he did at night had to be critical to the continuation of his life. How had he put it? That it was more about survival than about lust. And what of desire? Could she well understand now what he might desire with her? She remembered again his horrified look when she had said that she would find out what he desired and would give it to him. But she had not imagined it might be something so evil and so irreversible. It was at last beginning to really dawn on her that there was no lewd, promiscuous, or deviant sexual act that would fulfill his unusual longings, as she had once vaguely wondered about. There was nothing in his kind of desire now but what? Only violence and death. Her breath stopped, and her heart threatened to break. I'm the biggest fool, she thought. And then she went further and further into her thoughts. If he is not a man, then he is a dangerous creature. He could hurt me. He could hurt Sophie. And I gave this creature a handful of Band-Aids and told him that I trusted him. How did love blind me so to the truth? She remembered his hands, how tenderly and softly they had caressed her skin. And yet they could kill also. I'm going to scream, Vivian realized. She pulled the pillow over her mouth to stifle the sound, and then she screamed as loud as she dared. Hysterical sobs racked her body. Then, after a while, she thought she would suffocate in the small room, and she walked over to the window and opened it. It looked out onto the direction of Exchange Alley, which was dark and silent, since it was probably the early hours of the morning by now. She took deep breaths of the night air and clutched onto the window frame like a drowning victim. She had stood at the window for perhaps 3 or 4 minutes when the sound of faraway but loud and desperate screams reached her ears. Oh, God, no! When Gregory went out at night, this must always be what it was like, that someone gave up their life in order that he might live. And then the guilt of this led him to all of those wartime acts of heroism where he hoped to buy redemption for himself the way that the church used to sell indulgences for the forgiveness of sins. The screams continued. Somewhere below, someone was being slowly but certainly killed. Vivian covered her ears and bit down on her own scream. Then she couldn't stand it 1 minute longer, and she shut the window. There were voices in the hallway. One voice was asking what was going on. Another voice said he was going out to investigate and find out. Vivian slumped against the door and listened. After many minutes, the one who had gone to investigate returned and said, "Apparently a woman is lying dead in Exchange Alley. There's blood everywhere. It must have been horrific." Then the voices became muffled as the persons returned inside their room. Blood everywhere. Horrific. Oh, God! Oh, God! Never in her worst nightmares had Vivian ever felt such raw fear as she felt now. And what if Gregory returned? What would happen then? He could turn on her and hurt her as well. He was not her Gregory any more right now. He was a rabid beast that someone, that she, had let almost starve to death until the evil could no longer be contained. Terror moved through her veins. The clock ticked away the time, and still he did not come. I should get away, she thought. I should hide, but I have to see if I was right. I have to see what he looks like when he returns. If he returns. And then, after another hour had passed, or possibly more, she heard footsteps coming down the hall, and then she almost fainted to hear that they stopped at the room she was in, and she could see the dark shape of a man's shoes through the crack under the door. Vivian backed away from the door as if it were suddenly made of molten iron. Vivian, he said in his instantly recognizable voice. Vivian, let me in. His knuckles rapped softly against the door, as he had done 100 times on her apartment door in Queens, and as he had done another 300 times on her apartment door back in Milnberg. Vivian. Terrified, she hesitated. He could probably take the door down if he wanted to. He could always come and kill her later, whenever he wanted to. What good would it do to not let him in now? Did she not owe him at least to take his things and try to make an escape? She reached her hand for the doorknob, but before her fingers could reach it, it moved as he twisted it from the other side. She felt panicked fear pour over her like a bucket of ice water, and all of the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Vivian, he said again. Then she gathered all of her remaining courage and unlocked the door. He stepped in and shut the door behind him, and she scrambled back away as fast as she could, almost toppling over his small suitcase where it lay on the floor behind her. Vivian, he began, but then stopped. Don't come any closer, she stammered, incoherent with fear. Vivi, I don't understand. But now I do, she said, daring to look at his face. And then she saw it. His cheeks faintly flushed, his incandescent glow, his angelic and magical beauty, this radiance that could induce lust and prayer at the same time. He took a step toward her, and his limbs moved through the space around him, as if caressing a naked lover. His shoulders moved slightly, and she could suddenly recall every nuance and sharp detail of having his body against hers. When he had gone out for champagne, this is what he had done. The warmth coming through his skin had recently been another's, always another's. He moved again. Don't come closer or I will scream, she said, her small voice shaking. Oh, but he had never looked more handsome than he looked now, when she knew that he was dangerous. "You look like a young god," she whispered. "I know how you got your glow. You killed that woman." "What woman?" he asked, looking confused. "You don't have to pretend with me. I know the truth now. And if I run, will you chase me until you catch me? Am I to be next?" she asked, her voice quavering. "No, Vivian," he said sadly, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. "I will never chase you again. I'm sorry I ever chased you. Look, we should sit down and talk," he said, approaching another step closer. "I said don't come any closer to me!" she cried, panic-stricken. "I don't know what woman it is you think I killed, but I did not kill any woman," he insisted heatedly. "Are you really going to stand there and tell me that you did not kill anyone?" she threw out at him. A wild look came into his eyes. "No, Oh, Vivian!" "No matter what you said, I would not believe you now," she screamed at him. "Leave! Just leave and don't come back!" His face contorted into a look of such pain that it took her breath away. "Vivian, Vivian," he crooned in his beautiful, healthy voice, twisting the brim of his hat in his hands as if wringing out a wet rag, and looking pale suddenly, like a ghost in a dark suit, standing there in front of her. "Listen, no matter what happens next, I love you. I love you like I have never loved anyone, beyond all reason, and all explanations, and all choice. Where you end and I begin, no one can know. You needn't have me, but whatever it is that I am now, I am yours, and only yours, as I have never been another's." His voice was soft, but passionate and insistent, and full of torture and anguish and unbearable grief and love. "I want you to know this. Want you to know that there is no force on this earth that can break this love. And I can and do forgive you for what you are choosing right now. This is the mere surface of things. And our love runs so deep that no one can see the bottom of it. Oh, my little seamstress, I remember all those hours of sitting by your side and watching you sew. And instead of just all of those dresses and clothes, it was also you being stitched into all of my sinews, being woven into the very fabric of my being. This love that Vivian, Vivi. And then he turned and hid his face in the crook of his dark suit sleeve, and a sob broke from him, and he could not go on. All words fell away, and then they looked at each other. Only it seemed to her that the bloody and mangled body of the woman that she knew lay in the street there, lay between them on the ground, and she could not look at him without knowing what he had done to become so terrifyingly desirable and whole again. Every time I have held him close or kissed his lips, if they were warm, from where did that warmth come? And now I know, and I cannot unknow it, and I cannot live with the knowing. "Let me kiss you goodbye, then," he said hoarsely. "At least, let me kneel before you one last time and hold your open palm to my lips and tell you that I adore you, that I understand you, although you are wrong, that I send you away with blessing." He stepped toward her, and his hand reached for her, and a wave of frenzied, irrational fear came over her. How incorrigibly evil he must be to be able to speak of blessing after having just mangled someone to death in the street beneath them as if it were nothing, and then lying about it. And as he was about to reach her, she opened her mouth and screamed. She put her entire force into it, as if her life depended on it. The walls of the small room reverberated with her gunshot of sound. He dropped his hand, gasped, and staggered backward, as if the sound had torn a hole into him. His eyes had a wild look. "Is this what you want? Goodbye then, Vivy." He spoke hoarsely into the sudden, hair-raising stillness of the room, and then he dashed to the window, moving faster than any man could move, and he opened it, climbed through it, and vanished. Vivian screamed again and again, shaking, and that was where the man from the hotel lobby found her, standing white-faced and hysterical next to the open window and screaming out into the night. When the hotel employee at last understood that this had to do with the murder of the woman in Exchange Alley, he called in the manager to go and notify the police inspector, who was down in the street below, a block or so away, inspecting the body. Vivian did not sober up in her mind until the police inspector arrived. What was she going to say? After everything, could she really just hand Gregory's name over to the police as a suspect? He deserved to rot in jail for what he had done. But had he not also shown kindness to her? Had he not done more for her than anyone else ever had? She had her entire apartment because of him, and not just that, but her heart, this great love, well, at least while it had been intact. "Explain this to me again, Miss Westcott, and speak slowly," said the police inspector. He was holding a small pocket notebook in his hand like Gregory used, to write things down for when his memory might fail him. I don't know, but I saw," she began. "What did you see?" the police inspector asked. "This is very, very important now." She decided that she would leave Gregory's fate up to the gods. She gave his description, but not his name, and she said that she had seen such a man running down the street and away from the scene of the crime. The police inspector frowned. "That's odd. No one else saw anyone matching that description, and there was a man from the hotel out there, although he admitted that he may have dozed a bit. Well, you will have to come down to the station." Vivian did not want to go down to the police station. Her eyes burned in their sockets and her throat was raw and hoarse. She began hysterically crying. The police inspector looked at her as if considering whether she was a reliable witness or a hysterical woman, and then just sighed, called for the hotel staff to send up a doctor, and told her to give the police a forwarding address for her next destination in New Orleans. She gave them Nadine's address, and then waited until the doctor arrived, who gave her a sedative, and then that ended the night in a sudden and very thorough way. Vivian showed up on Nadine's doorstep on Saturday morning, sobbing and hysterical again. She had found some money in Gregory's suitcase and used it to pay for the rooms and for a man from the hotel to send Gregory's suitcase on back to New York to the address of Wolf's store. Gregory's journal appeared to be in the suitcase, but she did not dare to open it, lest it be page upon page of descriptions of murders that he had committed and that she would then become a knowing accomplice to. Now, seeing Nadine open the door of her small house and take Vivian into her embrace, Vivian lost the last of her courage and strength. "Oh no, what is it? Whatever can be the matter?" cried Nadine. "And where is Gregory?" Vivian only howled louder. Nadine could get nothing out of her, and so she put her to bed. Vivian was exhausted and fell asleep. Morning found her with new energy, however, and she returned to her weeping. Nadine came in to check on her. "This is the first that I have seen you in years and years, and you have said nothing since you arrived. Oh, what is going on? When are you going to tell me what is wrong?" cried Nadine. "Vivi, you cannot just let whatever is tearing you up inside lie there unspoken. You would not confide in me?" "I cannot. I want to, but I cannot," Vivian finally wailed. "There is no one I can tell, and nothing I can say. Please don't ask me any more. Please just don't probe any more. These are not my secrets, and so I am not free to tell them to you. Please just try to understand," cried Vivian desperately, and then the realization shook her that this was exactly what Gregory had been facing just a few days earlier, when she had been asking questions of him. Of course, Nadine would not take this for an answer. Had Vivian herself been willing to accept it? And now he was gone, and now at last she understood, both what he was probably holding back and what it felt like to be mercilessly probed when you were not able to reply freely. Oh, the horrible irony. "I have never felt closer to you, Gregory," she thought, "than I do at this god-awful moment." That seemed somehow funny to her, in an anguished sort of way, and she began to laugh. "Vivi, are you losing your mind? We have to get you to a doctor. I don't know what Gregory has done to you, but you look to still be in the grip of hysterics," Nadine said, even more alarmed than before. Vivian thought about this, and then a sobering thought came over her. What if... Oh, could things possibly be any worse than they already were? "I don't need a doctor," Vivian replied suddenly. "I need a newspaper. A woman was murdered in Exchange Alley, not far from our hotel. It was gruesome. I have to know, is there some update in the newspaper?" "Newspaper? Murder?" Nadine turned 5 shades paler, just in the time it took to say the second word. "But what does a murder in town have to do with you? Oh God, does Gregory have something to do with it?" Vivian shook her head and waved her hands through the air, like laundry flapping on a clothesline. "Do not ask me anything. I cannot answer you. I just have to find a newspaper." Frank left this morning's Times-Picayune on the kitchen table, Nadine finally said with resignation, probably realizing that she would not get anything sensible out of Vivian. Vivian hurried to get the newspaper, hurriedly turned its thin pages right there on Nadine's kitchen table, and within minutes she found what she was looking for, an update on the murder in Exchange Alley by the Hotel Monteleone, and a picture of an unknown man, the man being held on charges of manslaughter for the crime. He had already made a full confession to police about how he had starved, mistreated, and set loose the huge hounds that had attacked the victim, resulting in her violent death. It was like being struck by lightning as she read it, and Vivian felt her entire body begin to tremble. Oh no! Oh God, no! I have wronged an innocent, she thought. Oh God in heaven above, what have I done? Have I been entirely wrong about all of this? How did my imagination get so carried away? How could I have imagined that he killed people like some... She couldn't even think the word anymore, she realized, after his incredibly strong injunction at the cemetery for her not to speak it. And it wasn't even like that. It must have all been like something else. She sat down, collapsed with her head on her folded arms on the table, and then her sobs racked her body until she thought she could not utter one more cry. Nadine had come in, read the article, and wanted to console Vivian, but Vivian flailed at her approach, and Nadine cautiously backed away. I will die here now, thought Vivian. I will die in shame and of a broken heart. At any moment now, my heart will reach its limit of pain, and I will crack in half. Oh, what have I done? What have I done? She cried for a long, long time, until she thought that she might never be able to cry again, until her eyes were raw with redness. And then she stood up unsteadily and walked into Nadine's living room. Nadine, she said, in a voice made raspy and raw with so much crying, I'm so sorry, but I have to go. I have to hurry back to New York. Something terrible has happened, and I have to put things right. I'm sorry that we did not get to speak together much, or do any of the things that we had planned, but I have to urgently go and take care of something. I do not want to imagine the consequences if I cannot fix this thing. Please forgive me. Nadine was sitting on the sofa, holding on her lap the old family Bible that Vivian recalled Mr. Gerstner had once repaired for Nadine at no charge. Nadine turned her head and looked sadly at Vivian. Because Gregory is so unusual and so mysterious about many things, did you imagine for some reason that he did this? Must unusualness imply murder? She asked quietly. The room was still as the grave. Vivian's eyes itched in their corners as she tried to cry fresh tears that no longer readily came, and she looked at her best friend for a long time before giving a quick nod. Nadine sighed. Now that I'm older, I actually look at this book sometimes, at its contents, and it brings me comfort. It brought me a lot of comfort after the death of our first son. Take this passage, for instance, one of my favorites. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. The greatest is love, Vivi. Nadine was wiping at her eyes, her voice shaking. I confess, there were times when I envied you your great love with Gregory. Everyone else I know met someone and then got to know them, and then learned to live happily ever after with them. You two had fallen into each other somehow, before you even realized it, without any effort, more deeply than anything I have ever seen in this world. I thought you were luckier than any other woman to have that kind of a connection. But I did not imagine how much unhappiness there could be in that for you, how complicated it might be. And now, as I watched you hysterically crying for over an hour in there, I thought how glad I was to not have to be you, or to carry the burden of this immense love. Forgive me. She stood up and came over to give Vivian a loving embrace, and Vivian melted into her kindness with incredible gratitude. What should I forgive you for, Nadine? She asked weakly. For envying you sometimes, and for now being glad to be separate from your suffering. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, whispered Nadine, her tears falling on Vivian's neck. Vivian pulled back and gave a small smile, although it hurt like both of her cheeks might break. That is an ideal, Nadine. That is not what our lives are actually like. You and Gregory both, always trying to live up to some perfection. How good that you have both had someone as level-headed and even-keeled and not hysterical like me to help balance you both out. Nadine gave a small laugh. Well, I see you are beginning to see some humor in things again. Thank you for not asking me anything further right now. It is the best gift you could have given me. I have to go now, said Vivian. I have to find him. The next train for New York leaves tomorrow morning, so you may as well spend the rest of the day here, and then Frank can take you to the station in the morning. Little Frankie will be back with Frank by dinner time. Perhaps you feel well enough now to meet them. Oh, Vivi, do at least stay for that, said Nadine. And so Vivian stayed, and the friends held each other, and then spoke together about their lives and their children. He bought an apartment for us, and I half think that Sophie believes he is her father, Vivian sniffed. And now I will never see him again, she sobbed. Vivi, you will see him again. I know you will. Has it ever not worked out that way for you both? Said Nadine, running a hand over Vivian's hair and then putting a motherly arm about her. "He will come back to you. I know it. Now here, before Frank and Frankie get home and we have our dinner together, I will help you pack." "I never unpacked anything," said Vivian. "Not even a toothbrush or a nightgown?" asked Nadine. "Who cares about such things when you believe you are dying?" replied Vivian morosely. "All right, then. I will help you unpack them, and tonight you will get a night of civilized sleep," said Nadine, kissing her friend on the cheek. "Everything will be well. Have faith." As soon as Vivian returned to New York, she took a taxi to Gregory's apartment, and when he wouldn't answer the doorbell or open the door, Vivian knew where she had to go. It took her a few days to pull together her courage, but finally she made her way hurriedly to the book repair shop, lest she change her mind. She tore through the door to find Wolfgang Gerstner sitting at the counter, holding a tattered book in his hands and taking down measurements. "Mr. Gerstner," she began. Now that she was here, she was not entirely certain of what to say. I need help. It's about Gregory." Mr. Gerstner looked up, set down the book and his ruler, and called into the back of the store for William to make a quick exit, and that the store was closing for the rest of the afternoon. Within a few more minutes, the closed sign was hanging in the shop window, and the young assistant had gone. Vivian had not been alone with Mr. Gerstner before, and she half expected Anastasia, the incredibly beautiful, dark-haired bombshell, to slink in through the door and sit down with them again, as she had once, although presumably she was now gone, as Gregory had said. "Here, come around the counter and sit down, Fräulein Vivian. I already know something is wrong," said Mr. Gerstner. "Gregor sent me a telegram, telling me to keep things going and to pay his bills for a while, that he is going on a journey. He used another name, however. Why is that?" "Probably because he was wanted by the police for questioning," said Vivian glumly, sitting down across from Mr. Gerstner. "The police?" he asked with alarm, his bushy eyebrows leaping skyward. "What happened?" Vivian told him that a woman had been found dead in the street next to the place where they were staying, and that Gregory had run away. Mr. Gerstner's eyes flashed at her, betraying his agitation. "Why did he run away, exactly?" he asked slowly. "Because I screamed," said Vivian. "And why were the police looking for him?" he asked. "Because I gave him as a suspect," she replied, feeling herself dying of shame and guilt and self-loathing with each word. "I have done this to you, my beloved," she thought. "Your worst enemy would not have done to you what I did." "You thought he committed this murder?" Mr. Gerstner asked her, even more slowly. "Yes," said Vivian in a small, pained voice. "The body, apparently it was badly torn. There was a lot of blood." At the mention of the word blood, Mr. Gerstner stood up as if she had slapped him across the jaw. "You should not have interfered in what you do not understand," he barked at her. Then he seemed embarrassed with himself for this outburst, and he moved far away from her, to the front window of the store, where he stood for a while with his back to her. When he next spoke, his voice was crooning and soft. "I have come to admire you for what I thought was your good, practical sense. But you are a very silly Fräulein, he said. Think about it. If he truly lived, as I am beginning to comprehend that you suppose, the streets would be littered with corpses that would need to be explained. Might it not be valuable to learn to take just a little, to keep from taking a life, if at all possible? And even if he were to kill someone, Gregor is fine, sleek, and elegant. He is stronger and faster than most men. I know you know this. His fingernails are always clean, and despite his exertions, which exceed what he needs to do, by the way, because he is so idealistic and stubborn and proud, despite all of this, he rarely even puts a tear in his suits. Would you really imagine that if he killed someone, it would look like a bloodbath? I don't know. He wasn't looking exactly well when I saw him last, before the end, said Vivian. I really thought he might be dying. Then, for a reason she did not exactly know, she added, We lost your box of books before we reached New Orleans. Lost my books? Echoed Mr. Gerstner hollowly. For a moment Vivian thought this was an example of what Gregory had often mentioned, of Mr. Gerstner's concern for books above all else in this world. But then his next words explained it. There was more in that box than books. Oh no, Gregor, ach Gott. Mr. Gerstner wrung his hands, and then he ran his agitated fingers through his gray hair. What else was in the box? Asked Vivian hollowly, feeling her mouth going dry. I know, though, don't I? How could what I think it was be made to fit into a box? When he flew all those flights in the war, the cargo was full of boxes, wasn't it? And even of this. Did he ever eat anything in your presence, or look as if he had eaten anything and taken on more strength? Asked Mr. Gerstner with caution. You know that he doesn't eat, and I know it too, replied Vivian coldly. Ach, du lieber Himmel! What is it about love that makes people do such dangerous and stupid things? What kind of creature would willingly starve itself? He cried, and then he looked down at her, as if suddenly remembering again that she was still there. Explain everything to me once more, Fräulein Vivian, he said with a sigh, returning to sit back down across from her. Start at the beginning. And so Vivian told the story of their travels, of Gregory's strange illness, of his refusal to answer her questions, of his leaving her, of the screams and the discovery of the body, and of how she had accused him of the murder. Shamefully, she could not bring herself to admit that she had made Gregory promise to not leave her side during the entire trip. But he was innocent, she finally said, handing Mr. Gerstner the newspaper clipping that she had taken with her from the Times-Picayune in Nadine's kitchen. I accused an innocent man, and this is why I need your help. I have to find him again and put this to right. If I die without being able to make this right, I... She gulped back the impending tears. Mr. Gerstner read the article and then set it down on the counter again. And when you saw him last, did he look handsome and healthy again, and mesmerizing to look at, his features suffused with an almost blinding glow, his every gesture thrillingly beautiful, and his least movement effortlessly inciting desire? Yes, she thought, he had glowed like the broken sculpture of Apollo in the poem Gregory had read her, its body holding within it a star that shone forth and demanded of anyone looking at him to change their life. She almost said this thought out loud when she realized that Mr. Gerstner was probably jeering at her. He is holding up my weakness as something to ridicule me for, she thought, and therefore she refused to make any reply. I won't give you the satisfaction, she thought. I know it was so without you saying it, sighed Mr. Gerstner again. And then he asked, So, is Gregor no longer wanted by the police for questioning? Good. Well, at least that is fixed now. He paced over to the store window again and stood for a while looking out of it before he spoke. And when he did, it seemed that he was speaking to himself. He had you both wound up like springs, only for that energy to have nowhere to go, except to injury. Ach, I warned him of this. I warned him. He was silent for a bit, and then his voice increased in volume as he spoke to Vivian again. I came into my store one day, my old store, back in Louisiana, and you were standing by my store window, and Gregor was reading a passage to your turned back, a passage from Cyrano about love. Do you remember? Vivian nodded numbly. Yes, she remembered every shade of intonation of Gregory's throbbing voice as he had read to her, although she did not recall the words, but she knew he had been telling her that he loved her. Well, I realize that it is almost obscene to think of Gregor as Cyrano, but in a way he is. He is a long-suffering, self-doubting creature who falls in love with people the way that I accumulate books, readily and with enthusiasm. Beautiful girls mostly. I think you would not be surprised to hear that. And then he outlives them all, so that is a kind of suffering for him. Oh, I hope you are not surprised that you are not the first. He falls in love 5 times each day, even before noon. So please, do not imagine yourself to be somehow important. Roxane was nothing. She was a spoiled, foolish, ignorant young girl who just wanted to be adored by a handsome suitor. The greatness was not in her. It was in Cyrano. He brought the greatness from within him. Vivian had never heard Mr. Gerstner speak with such heat of emotion before, and she was stunned. Then, after a moment, she said, I'm gathering from all this that you don't particularly like me. 9, no, not particularly right now, he admitted. And if you want to know why, it is because you have brought much unhappiness to someone I deeply care for. I have been doing all I can to keep him stable, to keep him employed and busy and happy and feeling useful in this world. But to put it in bookbinding terms, his stitching has not been very sound in years. And then you keep coming along and undoing all my efforts. He has never been with you, but it has ended badly for him. The last time, when you left New Orleans, he almost killed himself. Oh yes, he actually attempted self-harm over you. Did he not tell you that? No, he did not, said Vivian with a shudder, and feeling tears come into her eyes. Gregory had never told her this, but somehow she knew it was true. Gregory was always eager to downplay his own misery, almost as eager as he was to throw himself into it. I had to step in and nurture him back to health with my own 2 hands, Mr. Gerstner continued. So I feel we have been working at counter-purposes, Fräulein. Whatever I try to repair or hold together with him, you turn around and destroy again. Sometimes it seems like my entire existence is an endless and futile string of repairs, from the books that people bring me over and over, sometimes even the same books, decade after decade, to the repeated efforts I make on behalf of some of my less stable friends. But I have to know where he has gone, she pleaded, returning to the heart of the matter once more. I'm going to end up sitting in front of this man and crying, she realized. It was unavoidable now. The tears were already collecting themselves in her eyes. I did him an injury, and I have to put it right. I admit that I did him wrong. Why should I be made to suffer further, and to be denied the chance to set things right? So now you are discovering what it is like to be a martyr for love, cried Mr. Gerstner. It is painful, isn't it? And what of when he left with me for Europe, and suffered dreadfully because he could not reach you and set things right? It is something else entirely now, isn't it? Now that the shoe is on the other foot, as you Americans say. Imagine how he felt to see you walk up the aisle and become the wife of another. Do you think that hurt any less than you hurt now? Imagine for once how he felt when it was he who was left without a forwarding address for you when you moved to New York. And now you are the one left without a way of knowing where he has gone. Might we consider it a kind of justice, then? Here, read it. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was a telegram from Rio de Janeiro. It read, "Have gone away on a journey. Stop. Keep apartment for me, please, and pay all bills. Stop. Will not hurt myself, as I already gave you my word on this before. Stop. Regards, Edmund D. Stop." Oh, God! Oh, God! Oh, God! I am so sorry! I've tried so hard to love him well, but you are right. Somehow I have not succeeded, said Vivian miserably, handing back the telegram and bowing her head over Mr. Gerstner's store counter and watching her tears splash in profusion onto its surface like rain. I have known Gregor for many years now, but of course I have not known him forever. From what I have seen, I believe there was always a romantic hero in him, eager to get out into the world and fight for something that he passionately loved in his heart. I confess, I began by thinking that Gregor was merely reality-avoiding and inherently selfish, said Mr. Gerstner in a philosophical tone. But now, I think that introspective people like him can appear more selfish than they are. It is true that they do spend a lot of time thinking about themselves, but not in a self-adoring way. They think about the ideal, and they think about their weaknesses and what they might better in themselves to more closely be able to approach the ideal. And eventually, I'd like to believe that they do make progress as individuals in deep ways that non-introspective persons perhaps do not. Gregor is narcissistic, I will be the first to admit, but he has also put a lot of effort into making inner progress. One might see him, perhaps, to use his swashbuckling terms, as a hero fighting for a very elevated ideal, consisting of loyal lover, refined gentleman, appreciator of beauty and the arts, and noble patriot, all rolled into one. His love of the ideal has caused him much pain. The theater, his pristine suits, the perfect behavior of a gentleman at all times. No one is like this always, not even him. It is not possible to be. He represses a lot of things deep within himself to keep this image intact, and this causes much internal injury. I do not share his unrealistic views, but yet I do partly admire him for his efforts. It is hard, living and feeling as he does. Such depth of sensitivity and emotion is hopelessly ill-suited to living in this world, I might add. But yet it is beautiful, and I admire how he carries on, despite all setbacks and all inconvenient intrusions of reality. He is, and has always been, a dreamer, a beautiful, beautiful dreamer. Wolf sighed, and a pained look came into his eyes. A lightning bolt seemed to strike Vivian where she sat. It is not that Mr. Gerstner hates me. It is that he loves him, Vivian suddenly realized, wiping frantically at her eyes with her sleeve. He truly loves him, and who knows what that love would have been like if Gregory had been different, and if Mr. Gerstner had been a younger and a real man. How did I not see it before? What else would motivate him to do as much for Gregory as Mr. Gerstner had selflessly and generously done? No one could get past the gravitational pull of Gregory's beauty, and his life and all of his key interactions with those closest to him had been warped by it. Why should this man be an exception? "Why is Gregory like this?" she asked, feeling her heart breaking within her. Mr. Gerstner shrugged. Who can say if there is one reason? He had a difficult childhood, although he was raised to privilege, and his life has not been an easy one. He is ardently in love with beauty, and so his standards for himself and for the world are high. Becoming what he has now become, through what I am gathering, was an act akin to violent rape, although he has never spoken to me of it directly, has taken him further from his heroic ideal, and I think he has never really been able to accept that about himself. These are the things that he thinks he cannot face, things that shatter his artificial image of himself completely. You think there are things that he does not tell you, but many of these are things that he does not want to admit, even to himself. How much did he tell you? About this, not much, she replied in a small voice. Almost everything I learned has come from observation of him. I did not understand why he had to keep things from me, and suddenly it seemed very important to know them. She paused to wipe at her face again, and when she spoke, the despair within her had turned into anger, and her voice sounded harsh and loud to her own ears. Well, that was then. Now suddenly I don't care a fig anymore for truths. I just want to be with him. I love him. I have always loved him. Please understand that I have to find him. Mr. Gerstner gave her a hard look. Mein Gott, Fräulein Vivian, haven't you had enough of suffering yet? Don't you think you, too, have played with fire long enough? Isn't it apparent that it never seems to come out right between you two? Maybe you should stop struggling now for a while, the both of you. Sometimes loving someone means caring for the other person and being with them, and at other times, it means staying away. Right now, the best act of love, and the practical and noblest action for you, is to go home and be with your daughter. You say you truly love him, so do this then, even if it is hard. Love is many things, and it is also practical, hard work. Oh, you have no idea how hard I have had to work at loving him well, my son and my friend." He looked at her closely, and she wondered exactly what he meant, whether it was anger and frustration with Gregory that had made Mr. Gerstner have to work hard, or whether it was the suppression of his own attractions and desires. Then his face softened. "Look, Fräulein Vivian, I would not be unjust to you. It is not really your fault. There was no way to make this work. If you have been observing him so closely, then you know that Gregor is not an ordinary man," said Mr. Gerstner. "I've known that since I was 16, said Vivian bitterly. "It never made me love him any less, although it did make me marry another, which I wholeheartedly regret, and which brought me nothing but misery." "Well, and if you know anything about him at all," continued Mr. Gerstner, ignoring her outburst, "then you must also know this, that Gregor is not a tame house cat. If you know everything, then you must also know that, on some level, he is a predator. He is a tiger, and you cannot keep a tiger as a house pet, no matter how beautiful it is, or how silky its fur, or how gentle it may be with you when it is in a playful mood. I know you two have been playing house together these past months, but you have a small child, Fräulein Vivian, and you cannot let it live with a tiger. Gregor tries harder than most of us to be a good man, but your instinct was right. He is dangerous, and especially to small children." Mr. Gerstner was looking at her closely, through his oddly ageless eyes. "Have you never noticed that animals do not like him? He always had difficulty finding horses willing to let him ride them. They must feel, well, what I said, that he is not an ordinary man." Vivian wiped at her eyes. "And you are not an ordinary man either," she said boldly. "I know a lot more about you than you may realize. I know that I cannot judge your age by your appearance, for instance. And I know that although you look like an older man, I couldn't outrun you. I think I also know—" "Fräulein Vivian, stop! Not another word." His voice was suddenly icy, and the way he spoke raised the hairs on the back of her neck and chilled her to the bone. "I do not want to be in the situation where I cannot let you return home to your daughter. You cannot think to endanger me or Gregor by spreading this kind of information, and please do not imagine that you could get away with it. I know he loves you, but I would readily and efficiently wipe you out if need be, and I guarantee you that it would be the cleanest and least solvable murder that there has ever been." "Then do it," she said forcefully, surprised to suddenly discover her mood flip like an iceberg flipping over, more angry now than afraid at the way that he was threatening her. "Do it! What do I care? The man I love has gone away, and I may never see him again. This world can threaten me with nothing any more. How is death any worse than what I have just lived through, having my soul ripped out of me? Are you not hearing me? I love him. Why would I ever hurt you or hurt him? I needled him endlessly to get him to tell me his secrets, and even though he refused to say them to me, now somehow I am the guardian of some of them nonetheless. I am now in the same position that he was in, having to spend the rest of my life not being able to speak to others about some things. And as he does this, so will I. I will keep his secrets, and yours. You have my word, and I swear it, in the name of the one I love." "When did you start speaking like this, in this overblown and melodramatic way?" asked Mr. Gerstner, turning up his nose as if he smelled something unappealing. "It is not very becoming. I rather think I liked you better as the practical young seamstress that you were before. Gregor has been a bad influence on you. Too much Cyrano and the like. Ah, I always warned him about that. Now please go home, Fräulein Vivian. You are needed there. Your daughter needs you. Let go of the idea of looking for him right now. If anything, keep your daughter safely away from him." "My mother can look after Sophie," Vivian wailed, bursting into sobs. "But I need him. Do you not understand? I don't care about danger. I cannot go on without him. I have to find him and tell him I was wrong and set all of this right. Oh, I love him, I love him. You cannot know how much I love him." Fresh sobs temporarily overtook her ability to speak. There was a long pause in which nothing was said, while Vivian cried and cried. "What is it with the both of you and all this unhappiness?" "Fräulein, I will be frank with you. I did not think you cared so much," Mr. Gerstner said finally. He seemed to be in a thoughtful frame of mind now. "For a long time, I thought he always got hurt because you never cared enough. But that was not the problem. It was that what you were both trying to achieve together was impossible." "I will take on the impossible for him. I will leave everything for him, go anywhere," she sobbed. The fire inside of her chest was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She felt like Joan of Arc, taking a sword into her hands and advancing into battle with a holy flame burning within her ribcage. Mr. Gerstner reached out a hand and unexpectedly touched her shoulder. She shrank away from his fingers. "Fräulein Vivian, despite your passionate hyperbole, it cannot be. Go home now. Be patient. Wait. Perhaps you two can be friends again later, when your daughter is grown." "But I will be old by then," wailed Vivian. "The last time we were separated, I did not see him for almost a decade. It may go fast for creatures like you, but in another decade from now, I will be near 40, an old woman." Mr. Gerstner sighed. "Well, what is it you want from me? What can I do? I'm not a magic fish that grants wishes. I am old myself, and you don't hear me complaining about it. Accept it. Existence goes on. Be hopeful if you can. Maybe being older will make the impossible become more possible. I do not know what else to tell you." He paused, looked uncomfortable, and then asked, "Can I, help with your daughter at all? Provide any financial help? I know she is not Gregor's child, of course, but, well, I'm sure he would have wanted it." A sick feeling began to spread in the pit of Vivian's stomach. Had this also been his motivation behind helping to furnish Vivian's apartment? This is what black rage feels like, she thought. You want to pawn me off with financial gifts, all while you speak of him as if he were dead? No, I want nothing. I just want him to come back, or I want to go to wherever he is, and I want no money from you. You can tell him for certain now, in case he still had any doubts, that I never loved him for his 1,000 acres or whatever it was, she shouted, standing up from her chair. So you will not help me? Fräulein, I cannot. As you can see in his telegram, he did not tell me where he was exactly or where he was going. When he gets back in touch, I will let him know that you came by, that you are sorry, and that you now know that he was innocent. Would that help you? Mr. Gerstner stood up as well, and they looked at each other warily. He is not going to help me, she realized. It does not matter what I say, or how much I cry, or how long I sit here and plead. He may even know where Gregory is, but he will not tell me." "Sir," she spat out through clenched teeth, so angry now that she wanted to tear him into small scraps like a sheet of paper. "If ever you need anything from me, I hope you will think back on this moment and on how little help you gave me when I asked you for it. The devil take you if he hasn't already." Mr. Gerstner smiled. "Ah, I see you are already beginning to feel better. As it happens, the devil has already claimed us for his own. But it is always nice to get well wishes." Vivian began thinking of a sharp retort to this, then thought the better of it, stomped to the front door of the store, tore it open, and stormed out, leaving her last chance of finding Gregory standing behind his shop counter, like an old stone statue.